Assalamu alaikum to those that are here locally. My name is Umayma Abubakar. I'm the Executive Director of Corporate Communications. I have the pleasure of speaking with some really impressive women today. Our panel will be focused around ROI, which basically is about return on impact through women in finance. As many of you know, diversity has been proven to be a competitive advantage to so many companies, sectors, and geographies around the world. A recent Blackrock study basically showed that companies that have more gender-balanced workforces outperform their other, companies that don't have the same balanced equality, and therefore showing that actually annually there's been a 2-point percentage jump from 2013 to 2022. So I guess the question on my mind when I was asked to moderate this panel, well, why are we still having this conversation? Why isn't there enough tangible impact actions that basically show us how to work towards a sustainable environment, basically? So how come we don't have enough women in these financial institutions? So today's conversation will really focus around how do we ensure that there's better gender equality in terms of clean energy? Where do we see women playing a more impactful role in terms of identifying problems, thinking about the solutions, and being innovative about how we be sustainable about that? So we'll spend a bit of time talking about that, and I also want to spend a little bit of time focusing around the unique perspective and skills that women bring to the boardrooms, to the offices, and how do we maintain the decision-making process and achieving that. So that's pretty much the focus of today's session. Before I jump into that, I thought I'd take a couple of minutes and introduce our esteemed panelists here today. You'll notice we have one person missing. She'll jump on as soon as she comes in. She's running late from another panel conversation, so bear with us and she'll jump back right in. So just to move into introductions, Amira Khalid, Vice President, Investor Relations and Communications for Waha Capital, Abu Dhabi listed investment management company. Counting Mubadala is one of its shareholders as well. Agatha, who will be with us shortly, is award-winning founder, CEO of Frontiers Market, and I'll ask her to introduce herself when she comes right in. And Helen Watts is a Student Energy Executive Director. Just a little bit about Helen. She's been listed as founder as Forbes 30 Under 30, Corporate Knight 30 Under 30, and is recognized as Young Clean Energy and Intergenerational Equity Advocate. Before I jump into and start unpacking the questions, if I can actually ask each of you to just talk really quickly about your institutions and what makes it unique. So maybe, Amira, if we start with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Umayma, for the introduction firstly, and thank you to the audience for joining us today for this wonderful discussion. So by way of background, like Umayma mentioned, I am VP Investor Relations and Communications at Waha Capital. Waha Capital is one of the oldest investment companies in the United Arab Emirates. It is a listed investment company listed on the Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange with primarily 3 business verticals. The first one is Waha Investments, under which we have 3 separate strategies: a credit strategy, a MENA equities focused strategy, and a Sharia compliance strategy. The second business vertical is our private investment business, under which we have 3 separate portfolios: a global opportunities, a core portfolio, and a legacy assets portfolio. And we focus primarily on investing not just locally but internationally, completely opportunistically with a flexible investment mandate. And the last business vertical that we have is Waha Land, which is our grade A industrial real estate logistics business. And as of the end of last quarter, Waha Capital has about $3 billion of assets under management. That's it, yeah.
Helen, please.
Of course, thank you, Umayma. So happy to be here. I am the Executive Director of Student Energy. And Student Energy, we're a global youth-led NGO. We've been around since 2009, so just over 14 years now. And really our model is centered around empowering young people to really drive a sustainable, just, and equitable energy transition. And so the different ways that we do that is really focusing on recognizing young people as agents of change, developing their skills, launching different training programs, ensuring they're well supported to develop knowledge sets, understanding how the energy system works. And then we also do something that we call making space for youth. And so that's where we'll actually partner with institutions, governments, companies to create things like advisory councils, youth delegation programs, any way for young people to really get more than a seat at the table, really have agency and be involved as kind of partners in different decision-making processes that might be happening around, designing an energy transition plan or shaping up kind of a sustainability commitment for a company. So really focused on empowering young people to be their most confident, prepared selves and making sure there's access for them to actually make influence now while they're still young, and then of course as they kind of go into their careers as well. So really looking forward to talking more about that.
Perfect. So maybe you set us up quite perfectly. First question maybe that I have for you is, there's been a lot of talk about gender equality and how we make space for that in terms of having a more sustainable future, especially when you talk about finance. Why the focus on gender women, especially in finance versus from any other sectors? So there are lots of sectors out there. I see the focus mostly in finance. Why do you feel like that's the biggest focus?
I think it's a big focus because I think we can break it down kind of sector-wide as well and look at kind of where we're seeing the greatest points of gender disparity. I know, for example, in the energy industry, the gender disparity gap is twice as large as it is in any other industry. And I know for finance, it's quite significant as well. And women in positions of finance, that's quite a high level of decision-making power that you have. You're deciding what to invest in. You're assessing and analyzing different portfolios of potential projects or initiatives that you could be supporting, which will ultimately be driving kind of what that new kind of system or landscape looks like. And so it's really about putting women in these positions of control, which I think for some is still quite a daunting or scary prospect because it means accepting the fact that there is going to be change. Women are going to come into these roles where they're making decisions about where we're investing, where we're putting our dollars, how we're designing this kind of new future that we're going to be living in. And it will likely look quite different. And we have the data now that really proves that the way it will look is a lot better. We're going to be addressing multiple co-benefits that come with increasing gender parity in financial roles. But we've also seen real data that points to the fact that women, at least at kind of a household financial management level, are much more likely to invest in future planning and really design kind of solutions that just make sense for the direction we're going in. So I think for some that's still quite a daunting prospect. Change is scary, and I think it really plays into conversations at COP28 as well around what we're willing to do and kind of share the kind of sharing of power, the redistribution of power and roles that we need to do if we are going to get ourselves on track to meeting some of the most urgent crises of our time.
Maybe I want to double click on that. So that implies that there are barriers. That implies there's a mind space that needs to be shifted. Are you seeing that as well in terms of actually the headspace of people just haven't accepted that women are in decision-making roles? Amira?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think traditionally, if you look at the financial services sector, there's a certain stereotype that certain roles or certain sectors are for women and certain sectors are for men. And financial services, unfortunately, suffers from that. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. 21% of women are on boards of financial services firms globally, right? And then out of that, only 5% of female CEOs sit on financial services firms globally, again, right, on the Fortune 500. So you're already talking about a disparity right there where you don't see women at the top. And while I'm going to say that, we are getting much better in building that pipeline, right? We've got a lot of, organizations investing in educating, in recruiting women at the grassroots, but the issue lies in actually retaining them sometimes, right? I was listening to a panel earlier and they made a very good point and raised a very good point about, not having that kind of flexibility, work-life balance with married women. We also saw that during COVID, women were adversely affected more so than men were as a result of COVID, because in both developed and developing countries, women ended up being the one who would stay back home and take care of their kids, right? So there are sacrifices like this that actually prevent women from going on top. Now, how does that impact decision-making ultimately, right? When you have only 5% women sitting in positions of power, how are you going to have, let's say, how are they going to pull other women? Because if you have a woman at top, she's going to pull other women. It is like Helen said, it is proven that women tend to take a more holistic 360 overview of their investment decisions. Women are more prone to actually look at ESG factors and factor them into their investment decision-making process. So if you actually don't have enough women sitting on top, you're neglecting that ESG factor right there. And also, I'm going to throw another number at you right here, and that just should kind of, but only 2% of VC funding goes into renewable energy project, which I'm sorry to say is an abysmal figure globally.
So why do you think that's the case? Apart from the fact that there's not enough women in decision-making roles, why else do you think that's the case, that we're not finding enough women to kind of play that role?
I think the first point would be work-life balance. Like I mentioned earlier, women require a certain degree of flexibility. Second, again, I'm going to bring the stereotype. The journey can be a bit hard. There is a glass ceiling there, unfortunately, within the financial services sector. There simply aren't enough women who are entering STEM. I think there is a need to definitely educate. There is a need for positive bias at the moment, right? We're at a point, we're at an intersection in our conversation globally where we've acknowledged that, women play a crucial role, right? And we've identified that there's a bias towards women, for sure. So how do you counter that? Till we actually achieve gender equity, what you need to do is have a positive bias towards hiring more women, training more women, and retaining more women till we've actually achieved gender parity and equity globally. That's the only way you're going to see more women at the top. I mean, we've all looked at the stats. It's going to take 150 years to achieve gender parity at work, which again, abysmal figure, right? And we need to shorten that timeline, and to shorten that timeline, you need to have a positive bias and you need to have positive reinforcement for women in the workplace.
But maybe, Helen, if you can talk a little bit about, as Executive Director of Student Energy, are you seeing the same thing? Are you seeing enough women coming into the studying this in terms of STEM factor? Are you seeing people having interest? Are there other barriers that are preventing them to carry that forward?
Yeah, I love that you bring this up, because it's something that I reference a lot, is that there actually isn't a demand side problem when it comes to young women wanting to be involved in the energy sector, especially in the energy transition space. We see from applications alone, so even kind of barring the selection process where we do achieve gender parity in our programs, but from the application side alone, we see, depending on the program, but we generally see between 40 to 60% kind of gender parity, which means that young women are very motivated to join programs, have access to capacity building, training, programs that can really support them to get into really impactful roles in the energy transition space. When we look at our alumni network and who kind of graduates and goes forward beyond our programs, that percentage just starts to go down. And I think, to Amira's point, like very much kind of looking at how are these workplaces not just set up in terms of that work-life balance and flexibility that is required to just really address kind of the different needs of men and women, but also how safe and included are young women feeling going into certain workspaces that are dominated by men. And you have to break this down intersectionally as well, like how safe and included do BIPOC young women feel going into spaces where they don't see anybody else who looks like them, and where they don't feel safe to participate. And so looking as well at how are we instilling that kind of cultural change and behavioral change that really is needed as well for young women to feel like they're allowed to and they can safely participate in these spaces. So we do a lot of kind of story-based initiatives to really profile young women in our networks, but also leaders that we know of in kind of the energy space, whether it's Demi Lola leading SE for All or Dimfna leading Clean Cooking Alliance, making sure that young women are really seeing these kind of role models and figures that are mainstreaming the idea that you can be a woman in a decision-making influential role in this sector. But then also stories about young women who are doing work now and creating real change on the ground. That's hugely important. And then I would say mentorship as well is another really, really important thing that we try to do, again, to like really instill, it's kind of that positive bias, but like really instilling the idea that you need to be in this space, you're allowed to participate, there's space for you, you are included here, and not more than that, you are absolutely necessary if we're going to meet our goals. It's systems change work, and so if we really want to get that kind of exponential curve that we see with renewables right now, going for the gender equity space as well, like we need catalytic change, which from the perspective of student energy is about getting an entire generation of young people who are very motivated around issues of climate and justice, really pushing for and advocating for this message as well as they go into their careers, regardless of sector. So I'll pause there.
Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to double click on. We talk about women and playing this impactful role in finance, but actually as we talk about clean energy and sustainable future, paint that picture. What does that look like? What roles are we seeing women doing? Or what does success look like in terms of preserving that sustainable clean energy future that we're talking about? Either of you can, that's for both of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up a little bit, and then I'll pass it over to Amira for sure. So I think this is where looking deeper at the data is really important, because if we look at the renewable energy sector, for example, we see that 30% of the renewable energy sector roles are held by women, which is not a great number to begin with. You break that down even further and you see that women with access to leadership roles is significantly lower, and the roles that we most commonly see women holding in these companies are roles related to things like HR, communications, administration. And so a lot of what we do as well is supporting young people, encouraging them to get into STEM training roles, but also really building awareness of the diversity of roles that exist in the sector. So especially as companies like non-energy companies are starting to actually build out energy transition teams or sustainability and climate teams, ensuring that young people know what those roles are. Maybe you're a policy analyst for a company, for a Microsoft or a company that's, and I'll switch with you in just a moment as well. But I think building awareness of those different roles is so important, because you're also not inhibited by your kind of technical skill set either. We're really seeing kind of more and more of these different types of roles that young people can pick up and take on, but making sure that there also is that access to training where they can develop those technical competencies. We are encouraging young women to get into STEM as well. I'll maybe pause there and switch seats very quickly.
Ajita, hi, how are you?
Sorry, everyone. Sorry.
That's totally fine. I did let everyone know that you were running late from another panel.
Just catching my breath.
Catch your breath.
Yes. Okay.
We were basically just starting to unpack, basically, how do we encourage women to play a more impactful role within the finance sector. And you've got a very interesting role that you play within your organization as being part of the founder. If you can talk a little bit about the foundation, your role, and the institution, what it looks at doing as well, that would be super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, hi, everyone. And again, it's just really exciting to be on a panel with such amazing women. So, yay, Equality Day. Just a quick context. I'm both an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur that is doing the work on the ground in India for the last 20 years, working with rural women as the core nexus of actually creating impact and change through technology and access. Frontier Markets is a company I started, I guess now 12 years ago, that today is the largest platform helping rural women have voices and actually getting access to the services and incentives they need through a technology system that has helped over 5 million families get access to services at scale as a for-profit business, both creating income and outcomes, but also really emphasizing the importance that women play as a role in being market influencers, game changers, impact creators. And within that same space, around the same time, I had set up a foundation because I realized that when it comes to the gender lens reality and also looking at the development sector, there weren't many champions as infrastructure that were really ready to invest catalytic capital or risk financing into this space to help build the economies or build the markets or build the opportunities. So Frontier Innovations Foundation is a foundation that was set up in 2013, so 10 years old. But the commitment was always, how might we better leverage catalytic funding, grant capital, to address the barriers to markets and unlocking private sector capital at scale. 5 years ago, it became 100% gender-centric. So we launched a fund called the She Leads Impact Fund, which ultimately has been about investing in businesses who will finally get an incentive to have a gender lens and really start thinking about where, if we bring in the right kind of catalytic funding into the area, for example, of helping agri companies work with small women farmers so that they can actually understand who small women farmers are and how do you end up creating the right product market fit solutions to take that to scale. If you look at our sector today, most of your agri companies are male dominated. The agri sector is seen to be gender equal because 51% in India of farmers are actually women. However, when you look at product design, it's not there. Now, what do most companies say? They say it's challenging to actually bring in a gender lens because we don't know product market fit. We don't know how to unlock debt financing or private sector capital. So this is where we're stuck. The foundation today has helped them get unstuck and incentivize them to actually design better products through catalytic funding and make that happen. So today, we've been able to kind of make this commitment to say we can help over 100 companies get access to the right finance to incentivize them to have a gender lens because, let's be clear, I'm sure you all have already said this, women are already at the center. We know this. We know why it's so critical. Let's just find easier ways to make it happen.
But maybe you can answer that, and then Amira, maybe you can jump in. If you're trying to find capital, if your challenge is mostly about finding the right capital, you've had so much success so far. How do you grow that, and what support do you need from other financial institutions? Because it seems like between your foundation work, you've already cracked the code.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, sure. Let's say that. Let's say I cracked the code. I cracked it. No, I think that maybe I found ways to show demonstration of what can be. I believe it will be cracked at a much bigger level, but what have I cracked? So if we look at the sector today and the industry today, if we look at the conversations that have been happening all week, trillions of dollars have been committed to all of these things, right? The challenge that we've always seen is how do you operationalize that? How do you get the funds that want to have a gender lens, that want to commit billions of dollars into the nexus of women? How do you help them do that?
Yeah.
And I think that for me, the first part, which was not even large, we're talking about like $5 to $10 million, is all we did. But even $5 to $10 million took bringing together all the different funders, getting them an understanding of what gender is about, why is it so important, how do you invest in companies, what are the frameworks and metrics that make that happen, but also demonstrating that $5 million actually can unlock $100 million of debt financing and impact to millions of people. That was the first stage. The stage that we're at now, because I think $5 million is nothing when we talk about trillions of dollars that we believe is being committed into this space.
Yep.
There, I think the challenge is getting that those funds and those players to see this. Now, I'm a small person in this entire ecosystem. So where I think my barrier is not getting a chance to sit in those same rooms at a much higher level. I'm not getting a chance to bring in like thousands of organizations that actually can do this work well. And we don't have that bridge of technical assistance financing to make that happen. So there's money everywhere. There's intentionality everywhere. But I don't think the right people are in the room to have those conversations and break those deals to make that happen well, because there's still a hesitancy and a gap that even I'm not understanding. Like, I don't necessarily know what the barrier is to make this happen if I think I cracked it.
Amira, how do you respond to that, being with your investment cap and your communications hat?
So I think what I'm going to say is we all know that traditional financial model exists, right? Traditional project financing models exist in our current financial ecosystem. I think what we kind of need to understand is with climate financing, we kind of need to be a bit more innovative. Those traditional financial models don't necessarily apply. We're simply not moving fast enough as far as innovation and climate financing goes. So I feel like right there is a gap, or rather an opportunity for women to kind of step in and offer solutions, offer products. I think it has to be a more solutions-driven approach rather than I'm here for funding. You're at a point, we've got some amazing women, Ajeta, Helen over here. Sometimes I think it's important for women also to put forward solutions to the actual problem. So build that blended model that is actually required to get your funding and financing. Because like I said, if I go in, I go like, I need, let's say, 5 million, 10 million, $50 million. And they're like, okay, but how does this fit into the traditional model? And you're like, I don't know. I was hoping you would offer me a solution. But that simply doesn't apply sometimes. So I think the onus is also a little bit on us women out there. And then I think the onus is also on financial institutions to offer more blended opportunities and focus a little bit more on innovation and climate financing. We've seen some sporadic examples in this region. I mean, Taka issued a green bond, Fab issued a green bond, right? But those are like 2 or 3 stories. I think we need to see a lot more of those. So climate project financing becomes the norm, just like, traditional loans or microfinancing is.
Helen, I'm going to look at you. Are you part of that solution as you prepare women into this workforce and help them think about how to get more credibility?
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier when I was introducing student energy that a big part of what we do is creating space for youth, and I think that applies to this conversation too in terms of how we're including the people who are most directly impacted by the impacts of climate change and the impacts of a lack of reliable and affordable energy access. Are you actually bringing those sectors or those stakeholders into the spaces where solutions are being designed and decisions are being made? And I think that is just absolutely critical. So for us, our approach is bringing young people, but we go a lot deeper than that as well. We need to actually bring young people into spaces who are from the regions who are most affected, who are kind of engaged or starting to move into roles in the sector that we're looking to engage with as well. And so, for example, with the financial sector, I mean, oftentimes we work most closely right now kind of with this model at kind of the philanthropic level. And so we'll work with foundations to help them design what their youth strategy looks like. And then a big part of that youth strategy is actually looking at how they're investing and building a team of young people internally at the foundation to help direct and set up and drive that strategy forward, ensuring it's mainstreamed across the foundation. So you're basically making, youth-centric investments or youth-centric grant making a core value set of that foundation. And we've done that successfully with a few different foundations now. Like I know the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet actually has a dedicated youth team now. They made this big verbal commitment that they were going to, support the creation of 150 million jobs. And so we came in and we were like, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to be working with youth organizations, and you're going to have young people on staff who really understand what the barriers and the needs are from young people. And so they have an amazing youth lead now on their team. We're working with them as well. So I think, that model, really pushing that model of bringing, the people who are most impacted and the people who have the most to offer as well in terms of solutions that are really need-centered into that creation and design process, and giving them access to decision-making power, which is just, the co-benefits to that are really innumerable. But I'll pause there.
Can I just also just react to that? Because I feel like, again, in the last couple of days, we've all been talking about the importance of youth, but not necessarily tangibilizing that, right? And I think that for me, it is such an obvious thing about talent. Like when you really need to start, creating that next level of data analytics, technology innovation, thinking about the complexities of coalition building and getting partners together, you need runners. You also need new hope and new energy, right? Like I started when I was 20, right? I'm now 40, just to be clear.
You don't look it.
But the fact is that, it was hard for me to even break that barrier at 20. Today, when you see the 20-year-olds, they're like 25 times more capable, excited, and ready to work. And it's like, what are we doing to make sure that they're a part of that conversation? You want to have the next big feminist protest around gender and climate? Bring her, have her catalyze millions of youth, and everything's done.
Umayma, I'm just going to add a little bit to that point as well. Like, I want to take it even a step back further. I'm way older than I look, so back in my...
We're all just revealing our ages at this point.
this is the beauty of our...
Yeah. So let's say more than 18 years ago when I was in high school, I didn't even know what climate change actually meant. I never studied about it. I never learned about it. It wasn't even a topic of conversation back then, right? But it was still a reality. I'm really not sure if, let's say, school curriculums or university, university curriculums, but like school curriculums have not improved since then considerably, for sure. So I had to learn what I know about climate change via experience through my job, right? And I think it's really important to incorporate that into your studies, not just about climate change, but actually finance, like improve financial knowledge for, in school. I'm sorry, none of us learn about investing in school, right? We're all learning as we go. So I think it's really, really important to bring climate finance into your classroom so that your kids don't just grow up with a knowledge about climate change, but they actually are able to offer solutions by the time they get to positions of power.
So is it just at a particular level that we're wanting to prepare the female gender into this conversation? Is it at all levels?
Absolutely. It has to be across the value chain, right, Omaima? And I think when you look downstream, it has to start at school level. You're preparing them in the proper way with the right education equipment and with the right skill set so that, by the time they enter the workforce, they at least have the knowledge that they need, right? Like I said, there was a learning curve with me because I had zero knowledge about sustainability or climate change, and I only learned through work. So I think it's really important, like I said, positive bias, and this time for both genders, both girls and boys. I think I'm personally a big fan of allyship, right? I'm all about female empowerment, but I'm a big advocate for allyship. I think we've got men in positions of power, and you can't just look towards women to pull you to the top. A man has to pull, or offer that advocacy or that allyship. And I think it's really important, and we're seeing it. I'm going to give an example example to you. We've got KKR, which is a global financial services company, and they've actually put a quota in place to have a set number of women on their team by X day. Otherwise, bonuses suffer. Right? So we need this kind of incentive, this kind of positive bias, this kind of allyship to actually see women across the value chain.
Any other?
I was just going to say, there's no question it's about alliances. Let's be very clear. Will is the reason why I got here as fast as I did. I was literally having my Pakistani driver, being from India, helped me navigate how to get here within 8 minutes, which was amazing. So there's no question it takes teamwork to make the dream work. Let's be very clear about that. But going to your point about even just tangible ROI solutions, I was just thinking about this, is that, I was in this panel yesterday, which was about philanthropy, talking about how they want to unlock private sector capital, and what we're talking about is the new ROI, right? And the new ROI is actually not new. It's about the fact that you can do elevated outcomes based on the investment that you bring in and when it comes in. And I think what's been interesting is that time and time again, there's enough research out there that tells you that when you invest in women, there's a multitude ROI that comes in, not just in terms of business outcomes, but in terms of employment and we're in Dubai, so happiness factor. And also at the same time, there's an impact factor that comes in. And what we've always learned from day one is that when you do invest in the right people to motivate those women, they themselves are then also exponentially returning their gain, which I think is powerful. And I can talk about that in terms of what I feel about incentivizing rural women. But I think that there's something really powerful here when we start thinking about examples. But one thing that I did say to the sector is I said, look, everyone wants an IRR. And let's be clear, everyone wants like a 22 to 30% IRR of any of their investments. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what does it take to get there? And I think that that's kind of where we think that the innovation can come in. Where does the role of philanthropic money come in for bringing allies, alliances? Where do we build the capacity of barriers? Where do we test and deliver? Where do we unlock debt? And then where do we unlock markets? And I think that's really important.
It seems like such a logical thing, but you talk about women and incentivizing. Then why aren't we doing more of it? Like, is the barrier there that people feel like actually it's a they problem versus an us problem? Why is this not becoming something that most organizations are putting in place?
I will be very, very straightforward, as I tend to be, is that I think that there is a bias on a systems perspective. So let me just give you my favorite example. Energy access, clean energy access as a space. How often do you get to see a picture of a woman sitting in Africa under a candle and then you talk about how she's suffering, and therefore you need to bring in a solar solution, versus recognizing that women are actually the key decision makers of consumption when it comes to their families. And if you incentivize them correctly, they're the first to decide to replace kerosene and candles, and will be the first to embrace solar because it's a no-brainer in their mind. They are the champions of solution versus the beneficiaries and poor people that you're looking to salvage or resolve. And I think it's a mindset problem. So we still see women as the carriers of the problem, but we don't see them as the drivers or the champions of the solution. And if we start shifting in that mindset, everything changes. When you start seeing rural people not as beneficiaries, but as the future customers of the world, when you start recognizing that 7 billion people, if they start consuming like we do, generally, we are all in a lot of trouble. And ultimately, the reality is that they can, but they're also more than happy to shift and be solvers. So how do we start changing that rhetoric? Women as influencers, rural people as assets, our understanding of who the true solvers are. And if we do that, then organizations will shift more effectively. And I think that it takes all of us to really get away from the poverty documentation to understanding the opportunity documentation.
So maybe let's talk about mentorship and networking. I'm sure each of you do a fair share of networking and mentorship within your respective roles. Maybe share some examples of what that looks like for each of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. Mentorship is so important when it comes to also, I mentioned this earlier, but making sure that women feel safe and included and like they can be honest and open about the specific barriers or needs that they have in accessing this space. And so for us, the way that we approach mentorship is we actually do a lot of youth-to-youth mentorship. And I wanted to kind of come back a little bit to this idea of embedding education, because one of the most frequent or kind of common projects that youth in our network take on are actually educational programs that, because we work with young people 18 to 30 years old, and we'll see quite a lot of our chapters actually take on, developing curriculums or educational programs to bring them down to primary and secondary level students to build more awareness. That is also like this huge mentorship mechanism that's happening kind of IRL, like in real time, all the time, which is a super magical thing. And so we try and kind of support a lot of youth-to-youth mentorship, but then mentorship as well from young women who are in kind of those early or kind of mid stages of their careers. That's massively important. So I think the way that we approach mentorship is we really try and kind of think critically about what outcomes are we looking to get from mentorship. If we're looking for young women to feel safer in kind of hearing their needs kind of validated, or the barriers that they're experiencing validated, and feeling like they can build off solutions and kind of things that have been tried and tested before, then getting young women paired up with folks who are kind of more mid-career, maybe a bit early career, is really, really important. But if we're talking about, young women, kind of motivating young women and kind of this collaboration model, youth-to-youth mentorship is really, really valuable. And then in terms of breaking down kind of embedded cultural stereotypes, having women who are maybe more in leadership positions paired up with young women. So we try and kind of take that really nuanced approach to just not kind of go at mentorship in a one-size-fits-all way, but really kind of tailor it to young women in our network and what they need. So that's how we approach it, but partnerships are really critical to all of that. So we actually, instead of kind of going about it in a kind of an ad hoc way where we just find individuals in our network who are willing to jump in, plugging them into a program, we actually try and develop more long-term value-aligned partnerships with different organizations that we trust, who are just kind of value-aligned in a critical way for us. So we know also that when we're setting up these mentorship schemes, there is that baseline of alignment around certain values and kind of perspectives, ways of understanding the energy transition in a really holistic way. And so really forming kind of those coalitions of actors who are willing to commit to just getting more young people, getting more young women, getting more diverse young women into this space is really critical, and I think really validating as well for young people in our network to see.
Adeta, is that different for you? I mean, is networking completely a different form for you?
I mean, maybe or maybe not. I'm just really curious in the audience itself. Like, how many women are under 40 and are aspiring to be in the climate space and are trying to figure it out? Yeah, seriously, raise your hand. I can see you. I was actually looking at the three of you in the back, actually, because I saw you guys smiling, going, "Yeah, right." I mean, there's a reality here. There is a so I have my own set of mentors, of course. Like, for me, the women that are 50, 60, 70 years old, they are phenomenal mentors and idols, and they've broken barriers in a way that is it's so respectful. And what I've learned from them, and I think for me it's about paying it forward, is that they gave me their hand to put on my shoulder, like being able to like call a Mary Robinson or a Pat Mitchell like on WhatsApp is crazy still, right? And it's because they recognize that they need to pass the baton, but at the same time, they come with so much wisdom. The critical thing for me was humility. I need to recognize that even though I might be younger than men and have different energy, at the end of the day, they're paving the path, and I need to learn from their mistakes so I can break those barriers faster or differently or more effectively. But then on the other side is the youth. And this youth, I think it's challenging. There's so much going on, all these different things, all these different spaces. So sometimes people just want real talk, right? Like, how can I like sit in a room with like 20 of the girls that are sitting behind and actually be like, what do you really want to do? And let me break it down. Because one challenge that I've seen for the folks that are younger than me is that they think that everything is obvious just because they care, they're the best. No, there's a lot of bureaucracy and realities and barriers that need to be broken. So how do we start helping them get reality checks also? But then at the same time, start navigating the right conversation for change. Then where do I get stuck as an entrepreneur in everything that I do in the world now, including age? And so I'm suddenly also starting to try to navigate between those personalities more effectively. So co-designing with people very differently, unapologetically asking. But one advice I do have for the youth here, unapologetically asking doesn't mean you deserve it, right? You need to do your research. You need to recognize that if I get bombarded by 1,000 messages of I'm doing this and therefore I want your time, so because we're also doing 1,000 other things. So it's about like doing the work. And so my job of mentoring has actually been trying to get the youth to understand that they need to go in-depth research, do the work, and ask the right questions for help. I learned in Davos last year, it was my first time in Davos ever. And I learned, they said, don't go there if you don't have something to share, something to give, and something to also explain in less than 5 minutes. And ultimately, I think that these are like hard skills to build because we're navigating a really weird world where everyone should step up, everyone should collaborate, everyone should be involved, but it's still like a process, right? And so I think that's probably where, I don't know, I'm in the between all of this. I'm trying to give time, but I'm also trying to make time, but then I'm also trying to respect the work that needs to happen. And it is a lot in 24 hours.
And that message is not just to females, right? Like there's lots of men in this room here. We need to help them change that mindset. Right. We need to help them think about how do they include people to those conversations. Amira, maybe you can wrap us up with how do we do that better?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to answer the previous question a little bit and
Go
then
ahead.
lead up into this answer. While, of course, there is a slight lack of mentorship, there's a very, very significant lack of prominent female role models. I'll give you an example, Umayma. We're sitting here at COP28 in the UAE and look at the COP presidency. We've got a woman, a prominent woman, Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, right there, right? A kid opens TikTok, she's right there. So you've got a role model, a leading woman right there that brings SDG 5 and gender diversity to the forefront automatically without question, right? Versus what Ajeta was mentioning earlier, that you've got a woman in Africa, sitting under a candlelight, right? Look, so there's a clear difference, right? The narrative needs to change and shift. So what we need to see is more female role models a lot. I'm going to share a personal story very quickly. I was going through corporate burnout back in 2020, sitting down. And even though as old as I am, I was thinking, oh my God, I don't have female role models to look up to in my sector. Who do I look up to, right? And I was like, okay, Amir, take a step back. Take a solutions-based approach. You can't see one, you find one, right? So I basically launched a podcast called Inspiring Women Podcast. And so through that, I had conversations with not just women within the financial services sector, but like women across the board. And my ambition there was that, a little girl or a young woman would listen to this podcast and know that there is a woman out there in a position of power within her sector. The journey might be hard, but it's worth it, and you can get to that point. So I think, Umayma, it's really important to have a positive bias, have the right narrative. Again, the narrative needs to shift. We need to take a solutions-based approach. And women, don't be scared to take what you want. please step in and take what you want. Don't be scared to ask for what you need instead of just standing back in the shadows and being like, somebody is going to offer me the solution. Trust me, no one's going to do that. Really, no one's going to do that. So you need to be brave and you need to step forward and you need to ask very clearly, demonstrate this is my skill set and this is what I want, and give it to me.
We said that today's panel was about identifying the barriers and finding solutions, and I think you wrapped that up perfectly. Any final words from either of you ladies?
I mean, I loved what Ajaytha was saying around the importance of showing up prepared. I'll make this call as well just for young people. A lot of what I end up doing is having to kind of de-risk the idea of engaging with young people, because young people don't want to just show up and like disrupt and make kind of blanket statements without having much to offer beyond that or a really understanding of the nuanced issues. So I would just really want to kind of underscore, like, do your research, engage with organizations as well that can fill in the gaps for you. And just make sure that you're showing up and taking every advantage of those moments as they do come up, and really proving that young people deserve to be in these spaces. Because I think it continues to be a challenge for us. Is it's too easy to write off young people and keep shutting the door at a certain level because they think that they're only showing up to protest or to kind of disrupt spaces in a really kind of ego-driven way. And while that type of activity is still hugely, hugely important, we need people storming the castle from the outside. We need people storming the castle from the inside too. And in order to do that effectively from the inside, we need to continually prove to others, which is unfair, but it is true. We need to continually prove to others that we're capable of engaging and collaborating and contributing meaningfully, just as much as any other person who has, decades and decades of experience is. So show up prepared, do your research, engage with organizations who can fill in the gaps.
I'm just going to say that I'm hoping that this is the last time any session is barriers. And I think that we ultimately now get into a place we call, what are the opportunities? And therefore, what solutions, how are we reviewing our solutions and addressing scale, right? So like next year, I want, whether it's not here, it doesn't matter, but still in this space, I feel like that needs to be the panel, right? So it's like, opportunities, what solutions worked, and let's own ourselves accountably on saying that we're moving in that direction going forward.
A round of applause, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. That's all we have time for today. Thank you.